Settle into whatever position you will be sleeping in tonight. There is nothing to follow closely here, and nothing you need to remember. Let your eyes close. Take one slow breath in through the nose. And let it go. Again, in. And out, a little longer than the breath in. Now let the breath go back to its own rhythm. It knows what it is doing. Bring your attention to the top of your head and let the scalp soften. Let the forehead smooth out. The small muscles between the eyebrows can let go. Let the eyes rest heavy in their sockets, nothing to look at. Unclench the jaw. Let the teeth come apart and the tongue rest low in the mouth. Let the whole face be soft and heavy and still. Let that softness move down into your neck and the back of your neck, where the day is often held. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, all the way down. Feel the weight of your upper arms sinking into the bed. Your elbows, your forearms. Your wrists and your hands and each finger going loose. Bring your attention to your chest, rising a little and falling a little on its own. Let the ribs be easy. Let the breath be shallow if it wants to be. Let your belly be soft, nothing to hold in. Feel your back all the way down, supported. You can hand your weight over to the bed. Let the hips settle and widen. Let your thighs be heavy. Your knees, the backs of your knees softening. Your calves, your ankles. And your feet and the toes letting go, one after another. Now feel the whole body at once, from the crown of the head down to the soles of the feet. Heavy, warm, still. If any part of you is still holding on, let the next breath out carry a little of it away. There is nothing more to do now. In a moment, a story begins. It is a long one, about an old teaching device and a monk who never mentioned it. You are not being asked to follow it. Let the words go by like weather. If you drift off in the middle, that is exactly right. The hand that Guido never drew. Hold up your left hand, palm toward you, fingers together. Somewhere in the middle of the 11th century, or perhaps a little after it, somebody began treating that surface as a map. At the tip of the thumb sat the lowest note in ordinary use. From there, the path spirals. Down the thumb, around the bases of the fingers, up the outside of the little finger, across the fingertips, and inward again to the middle joint of the middle finger, finishing on the back of that joint, the only place in the whole scheme that sits on the back of the hand. 19 places, or 20, depending on the teacher. Between the lowest and the highest lies rather more than the range a single voice can comfortably sing. A teacher stood in front of children and pointed. He touched the base of the ring finger, and the children sang that note. He moved to the joint above it, and they sang the next. Nobody had to say the name of a pitch aloud. That mattered in a stone building, where one voice giving instructions ruins the sound of 30 voices doing what they were told. It worked under the monastic rules that forbade talking. It needed no instrument and no book, and nothing about it could be left in another room. The device is called the Guidonian hand, after Guido of Arezzo, a Benedictine monk born around the year 991, who is the reason written music looks the way it does. Guido never mentions the hand in any of the 4 works securely his. He described his actual inventions at length and with a good deal of pride. Hands were doing this work for other subjects long before anyone put pitches on one. Easter moves every year because its date depends on the moon, and working it out was a standing arithmetic problem for clergy, who often had neither writing materials to hand nor much training in calculation. An English monk, Bede, described reckoning it on the fingers in the 8th century, and the calendar on the hand remained a standard instrument for 800 years afterward, into printed manuals of the 15th and 16th centuries. A hand carries 14 finger joints plus 5 nails, 19 landmarks in all. 19 years is the length of the lunar cycle they were tracking. Nor is the habit only European. Chinese phonological charts of the 13th century, tables sorting the sounds of the language, were mapped across the fingers, and more than 100 distinct hand mnemonics have been identified across Chinese culture. Stefano Mengazzi, working through the surviving corpus of medieval music theory, counted roughly 140 drawings of the hand, scattered across some 1,300 manuscripts. Most of them are from the 15th century, 400 years after Guido, and most of those from German-speaking territory. Dolores Pess catalogued the manuscripts of Guido's own writings for her edition of them, and 12 of them contain a hand. In nearly every one of the 12, dozens of pages separate the drawing from anything Guido wrote. Mengazzi reads the drawings as an echo of oral teaching, rather than the teaching itself. Cesarino Ruini opens the entry on Guido in the Italian National Biographical Dictionary with a flat statement about sources. Nearly a century of archival research has produced exactly one document about him, and everything else known about his life comes from scanty autobiographical hints in his own works. That one document is dated the 20th of May, 1033, at Arezzo. In it, the local bishop, a man named Tettold, grants a nearby hermitage a share of the taxes on the town's trade, and on Ruini's reading, Guido drafted and signed it himself. It is the last trace of him. His birth date comes from a manuscript that no longer exists, in which he apparently said he was 34 years old while John the 19th was pope. That puts the remark somewhere in the 1020s or early 1030s. Where he was born is unsettled. Arezzo and the region of Pomposa both have arguments, both drawn from one ambiguous phrase in a letter he wrote late in life. He signed himself simply Guido. 4 works are securely his. 2 of them open with a small block of Latin verse in which the first letters of the lines, taken in order, spell his name, and both blocks close with the same line, saying that whoever composed the songs wrote himself into the first letters. Beyond that, the last of the 4 refers to a reigning pope who died in 1032, and it cross-references the other 3 by name, so their order and the latest possible date are both fixed. The first is a systematic treatise on music called the Micrologus, written for Tettold in the mid-1020s. The second is a verse handbook, putting much of the same material into rhymed lines a student could memorize. The third is a prologue Guido wrote to introduce his own antiphoner. His own book of chants notated his own way, and the antiphoner itself is lost. The fourth is a letter to a monk named Michael from the early 1030s. Almost every biographical detail beyond that one charter comes from the letter to Michael. The letter is a consolation piece. Michael is in trouble. Guido is writing to a fellow victim. The organizing theme is envy. Envy took paradise from mortals, Guido says. Then comes the story of a craftsman who brought the Emperor Augustus a glass that would bend instead of shattering, and who was executed for it. Out of that frame come the biographical details. that Guido had to leave the monastery at Pomposa because of the hostility of the other monks, that the abbot later repented having sided with them and begged him to come back, that the Pope in Rome heard about his school and sent 3 messengers to fetch him. A cantor in the year 1000, the monk whose job was to lead the singing, learned chant the way a person learns a language, by hearing it. A master sang a phrase, the student sang it back. This went on for years. There was notation of a kind, small marks called neumes written above the words, showing the shape of the melody, up here, down there, a turn, a held note. What the neumes did not show was how far. A rising sign told a singer, who already knew the melody, that this was the place where it rose. In the prologue to his lost book of chants, Guido writes that the singers of his own day are the most foolish of all men. Gregory the Great was the supposed source of the authoritative chant. Leo and Albert were local choirmasters. Hardly anyone agrees with anyone else. Guido writes, not the student with the master, not one student with another, and the result is that there are now not one antiphoner but as many antiphoners as there are choirmasters in the churches, so that people say openly that a book is not Gregory's antiphoner but Leo's or Albert's or somebody else's. He says elsewhere that it took 10 years to acquire an imperfect knowledge of singing. Even after 100 years of daily singing, he says in the prologue, singers will never sing one short chant by themselves, without a master, and all the while they are singing they are losing the time in which they could have learned to read everything, sacred and secular alike. His solution begins from a point that had been arriving slowly for about 2 centuries. That high notes go up on a page and low notes go down is not obvious. It is a metaphor, and Marie Elizabeth Duché traced the emergence of that spatial conception of pitch to the 9th through 11th centuries, in step with the search for a notation that could carry it. An anonymous 9th century handbook had sketched a scheme of pitch as height. Scribes in southern Italy were writing neumes at genuinely different heights above the text to show the size of the interval. A treatise that circulated under the name of an abbot called Odo, and is now thought to be the work of an unidentified North Italian monk, had fixed the practice of naming the 7 pitches with the 7 letters A through G, and then repeating them at the octave, the point where the pattern of pitches starts over. Guido knew that treatise. He recommends it by name at the end of his letter. Guido made a grid of the inheritance. Pitches, he writes, are arranged so that every sound, however often it recurs in a melody, is always found in one and the same row of its own. To make the rows easier to tell apart, lines are drawn, and some rows of pitches fall on the lines themselves, while others fall between the lines. So a space carries pitch exactly as a line does. That single decision nearly doubles the resolution of what is now called the staff. The set of horizontal lines music is written on, at no cost in ink. It is why 5 lines carry 9 pitches rather than 5. A set of ruled lines tells you the intervals, but not which pitch you are on. Guido is blunt about it. However perfect the placement of the neumes may be, it is utterly blind and worth nothing without the addition of letters or colors. So two colors, he says, saffron and red, with a rule that goes with them. Counting from A saffron line is the third letter, C, and a red line is the sixth letter, F. Colored lines did not survive. Letters did, because a letter written at the left edge of a row to say which row it is a clef, and the modern treble clef is a stylized alphabetic G that has been drifting away from its own shape for 1,000 years. Carol Berger's formulation is that Guido radically transformed and improved a device present in embryo. Rows comprising both lines and spaces, in ascending order, over an extended range, with letters identifying which row is which. His letter to Michael is where the syllables come from. Guido starts by attacking the ordinary method of working out an unfamiliar chant. You took the letters written over the neumes and found them on a monochord, a single string over a marked board, the medieval pitch pipe. That method, he says, is a good rule for little boys and a very bad one for anyone who continues with it, because it leaves a singer dependent on the instrument for every step. He wants instead a singer who has committed to deep memory the differences and the properties of the individual sounds and of every rise and fall between them. His word for it, over and over, is proprietas, property. What a pitch is like, what it feels like to arrive at it from below, its character in context, not its position on a string. And to teach that, he offers a trick. If you want to fix a pitch in memory so firmly that it will come to you anywhere, in any chant, known or unknown, you should mark that pitch at the head of some very well-known melody, and keep such a melody ready for each pitch you want to remember, one that begins on that pitch. For example, he says, a hymn he uses with beginners and again with his most advanced students. The hymn is for the feast of the Nativity of John the Baptist. In the manuscripts, each of its first 6 phrases is marked with the pitch that phrase begins on. The first on C, then D, then E, then F, then G, then A, each one step higher than the last. All 7 phrases run like this. Ut queant laxis, resonare fibris, mira gestorum, famulae tuorum, salve polluti, labii ritum, sanct io hans. So that thy servants may sing with loosened voices the wonders of thy deeds. Absolve the guilt of their stained lips, Holy John. Now take the first syllable of each of the first 6 phrases. Ut queant gives ut, resonare gives re, mira gives my, famulae gives fa, salve gives sal, labii gives la, ut, re, my, fa, sol, la. 5 of the 6 are still what children are taught to sing. The step from the 3rd syllable to the 4th is a half step, smaller than the others. The hymn's words are usually credited, with real doubt, to Paul the Deacon, some 2.5 centuries before Guido. Whether Guido composed the melody or took one already circulating is not known. Guido then asks his reader whether he sees how the melody begins its 6 phrases on 6 different pitches. Anyone practiced enough to know the head of every phrase, so that he can begin whichever phrase he wants without hesitating, will be able to sound those same 6 pitches wherever he sees them, according to their properties. It works in both directions. Hearing a phrase sung without notation, work out which of the hymn's phrases best fits its ending, so that the last pitch of what you heard and the first pitch of the hymn phrase are the same. Then you know where the melody ended and can write it down. Reading a notated melody you have never heard, take each phrase on the page and work out which phrase of the hymn its ending joins onto. Then the pitch has a name. Guido says that after he began teaching this to boys, some of them within 3 days could easily sing chants they had never heard, where other methods could not manage it in many weeks. 2 things are missing from that passage. Guido never writes the 6 syllables out as a list of names for pitches, and he never uses the word hexachord, the name later theorists gave to the 6-note group built on those syllables. A third thing is present that usually falls out of the story. He says, a few lines later, that he has supplied further short melodies for each individual pitch, which makes the hymn one worked example out of a set. That the 6 syllables are a set of names for 6 pitches is an inference his readers supplied themselves. Rudimentary use of the syllables as pitch names can be documented in the second half of the 11th century, within a generation or 2 of Guido's death. Whether Guido himself used them that way, Carol Berger wrote, must remain a matter of conjecture. For about 200 years, almost nothing develops. A monk usually called Johannes Cado, writing around the year 1100, warmly recommends the syllables and tells the reader to practice them. Then, in what is probably the earliest surviving text connecting the syllables to the hand, he tells him to get into the habit of singing on the joints of the fingers, so that he may afterwards use the hand instead of a monochord, trying melodies on it, correcting them, composing. And then, in the rest of his long treatise, he barely uses the syllables at all, and not in the chapter on composing chant. His reason for preferring the hand to the monochord is that the hand goes everywhere with you. He still treats the 7 letters as the primary way of naming pitch. That pattern holds across the 12th century and most of the 13th. Mengazi went through the surviving treatises one by one, marking where the syllables appear and where they do not, and the dominant shape is a single glancing appearance. In a diagram, in a musical example, on a hand, in a margin, with no explanation of what the syllables are for or where they sit in the larger scheme. Until the middle of the 13th century, he concludes, the music masters displayed no interest in developing a hexachordal terminology, much less in organizing the 6 syllables into a system. Then, in the second half of the 13th century, the music masters build the system all at once. 6 syllables cover 6 notes, and a chant covers more. Those syllables are not attached to particular pitches at all. They are attached to a shape: whole step, half step, whole step, with the half step always and only between my and fa. Start the shape on C and you sing C, D, E, F, G, A with no B in it at all, and that is the natural hexachord. Medieval singers used two different Bs, a higher one and a lower one, a half step apart. Start the shape on G and you need the higher B, which gives the hard hexachord. Start on F and you need the lower one, the flattened B, to keep the half step where the shape demands it. That gives the soft hexachord. 7 of these hexachords, overlapping, cover the whole singable range. To sing a melody wider than 6 notes, a singer changes hexachords in mid-phrase, on a note the two have in common, and simply starts calling it by its other name, a maneuver called mutation. A pitch being sung as sol is relabeled ut or re, if the melody is about to climb past the top of the current hexachord. Singers memorized Latin tags for the awkward cases. One of them says that my against fa is the devil in music, a rule against a particular harsh interval of 3 whole steps. And Guido's proprietates, the character of a pitch in context, becomes something a singer can name out loud. It costs something. There is no syllable for the note just below a melody's home note, the one that pulls toward it, what later theory calls the leading tone. There cannot be, because that note is simply the my of whichever hexachord the singer has mutated into, with no independent existence. This system names intervals and positions, and does not name what a note is doing. The 2 forms of B left a mark still visible in modern notation. Scribes wrote the lower B with a soft round belly, and the higher B with hard square corners. Round B is the ancestor of the flat sign, which lowers a note by a half step. Square B split into 2, the natural sign and the sharp sign, one canceling and one raising. French still says it out loud. Bémol, soft B, is a flat. In German, the square B deformed further into an H, which is why B in German means B flat, and the note English speakers call B natural is called H. By about the year 1300, the apparatus was complete, and it stayed that way for centuries. A 13th-century English commentary on the micrologus altered its source slightly and consequentially, describing the 6 syllables as the basis of all harmony. That phrase is not in Guido, and it is applied to a device Guido had presented as one mnemonic among several. Mengazi calls it the initial flutter that leads to a hurricane. On Mengazi's account, the word hexachord meant something else throughout the Middle Ages. It meant the interval of a sixth, the distance between 2 notes, not a group of 6 of them. It changes meaning at the end of the 15th century. He points to a treatise Ramos de Perga published at Bologna in 1482, in which Ramos calls Guido a better monk than a musician and credits him with composing a hexachord, a 6-note structure, on the grounds that 6 is what the ancients called a perfect number, equal to the sum of its parts, 1 plus 2 plus 3. Within a generation, the reading is standard. Hexachordal theory, as most often described today, Mengazi argues, may aptly be described as a 15th-century creation. Humanist theorists, reaching for the four-note groups of ancient Greek theory and wanting a Latin structure to set beside them, took 6 syllables that had been an aid to singing and promoted them into the foundation of the whole 7-note system. His sharper point is that the medieval scale, the gamut as musicians of the time called it, was always fundamentally 7-note, and the hexachords ride on top of it as an optional aid. The theory itself was not unanimous. One line of medieval theory asks what a singer should do who has not learned the hand, which Mengazi takes as evidence that the hand was not treated as indispensable. And Johannes Gallicus, in the 15th century, argued that the 6 syllables were a small novelty, and that Guido's real achievement was the staff and the 7 letters. The oldest surviving drawing of a hand in the developed spiral order sits on one page of one manuscript at the Abbey of Montecassino, from the end of the 11th century. It marks the letter clefs in their places on the fingers, and instead of syllables above each clef, it writes T or S, tonus or semitonium, whole step or half step, to show the distance between that place and the one before it. 12th century hands diversify from there. Some with clefs alone, some with clefs and syllables, some with clefs, syllables, and an indication of which pitches fall on lines and which in spaces. Guido's name arrives at roughly the same moment as the picture. In the first decade of the 12th century, Sigebert of Gembloux wrote that Guido the monk of Arezzo shone above nearly all musicians in the church, and should be preferred to his predecessors, because by his rule even boys and girls can learn unknown chants more easily than by a master's voice or by the use of an instrument. This works, Sigebert says, so long as 6 letters or syllables are set melodically to 6 pitches, and those pitches are distinguished throughout the whole octave by the joints of the fingers of the left hand. Sigebert wrote that roughly 75 years after the last document mentioning Guido alive. He also calls him Guido Aretinus, Guido of Arezzo, in one of the earliest surviving uses of the toponym. Later compilers copied his paragraph forward, and that is the channel through which the attribution reached everyone else. A 14th century writer noted that some people say the blessed Gregory discovered the 6 pitches when he composed the hymn Ut queant laxis, though Guido, who was a grammarian, handed that hymn on to the boys he taught, and then concluded that whether Gregory or Guido was the inventor, it was not from human ingenuity, but by divine inspiration. Musical hands also predate Guido in a rough form. That anonymous 9th century handbook, the one that first sketched pitch as height, survives in copies which say that the tetrachords of the scale, its 4-note groups, may be assigned to individual fingers. There is also a 9th or 10th century poem beginning taking its start from the top of the index finger, read by one 20th century scholar as a description of a pre-Guidonian musical hand, and reread in 1981 by another as a way of memorizing the standard opening phrases of chant. What the developed hand added to those rough versions was the spiral order of the places and their use for Guido's full range. Theorists who write about the hand call the note positions loca, places, the precise term the classical rhetorical handbooks use for the imagined locations in a memory palace. Carol Berger read the hand as one chapter of the medieval art of memory, and a different scholar, Anna Maria Buss-Berger, later extended that reading across medieval music theory generally, arguing that it borrows its diagrams wholesale from the same tradition. The hand, the tree, the house, structures memorized first and then filled with whatever needed learning. Carol Berger also argues that the developed hand was the final product of the search Guido began. The search for a method that would fix the steps in a student's memory and free him from depending on a piece of equipment. A picture of a hand carries the map but not the practice, and the shape of a hand is the one part nobody needed telling. The lesson is in the pointing. Which joint, in what order, at what moment, corrected in real time when a child sings the wrong note. That goes from a teacher's hand to a student's hand, and the student becomes a teacher. And the parchment records it only when someone stops to write down what every teacher can do without thinking. All three surviving copies of a treatise Johannes Tinctoris wrote about the hand, around 1473, carry a picture of a hand. A Latin injunction on some of the surviving drawings runs, "Learn your hand if you wish to learn singing well." Singing by these syllables went on working for 600 years, and then came apart gradually, leaving its pieces in use. A missing seventh note was the obvious defect once anyone started thinking in octaves, and the 15th to 17th centuries produced a run of competing repairs. Ramos de Perja proposed 8 syllables in 1482. Hubert Weilrent at Antwerp taught a set of 7 beginning bow, CD. 2 more sets of 7 were proposed in Germany and did not spread. Every one of those schemes replaced the 6 syllables wholesale, and none survived, because what one was a 7th syllable added to the 6, and it was already sitting in the hymn. A 7th phrase of that hymn was left over, Sanct Io Hands. S from Sanct, I from Io Hands, because Latin spells John with an I. S-I-C. An early proposal to add a 7th to the existing 6, from around 1599, comes from Urrutius Putinus, who called his 7th note by rather than C. Whoever first proposed C is not on record, but C is the one that stuck, which made the whole scheme look as though it had been complete from the start. Ut became due somewhere in 17th-century Italy, for the ordinary reason that a syllable ending in a vowel is easier to sing than one ending in a consonant. By 1672 do is reported as in general use there. C became Thai in 19th-century England, because C and Sol both began with the letter S, and teachers wanted to abbreviate each syllable to a single distinct letter in print. The syllable's modern afterlife runs through Sarah Glover, who developed a teaching system in Norwich and published it in 1835, and John Curwen, the Congregationalist minister who was lent a copy of it in 1841 and built it into a movement he called tonic sol fa. After the syllables themselves, with its own press, its own college, and an enormous 19th century following. Around 1870, Curwen added hand signs, a distinct gesture for each of the 7 degrees of the scale, made in the air by teacher and singers alike, and justified by his doctrine that each degree has a characteristic emotional quality. Zoltan Kodaly adopted and modified those signs in the 20th century. A child in a music classroom today is still making shapes with a hand while singing. Those gestures do not descend from the Guidonian hand. A Guidonian hand is a fixed map of absolute pitches on a static surface that somebody points at. Curwen's signs are 7 moving shapes for relative scale degrees, made in the air, meaning nothing about absolute pitch at all. One genuinely direct descendant did travel east. Tomás Pereira, a Portuguese Jesuit at the court in Beijing, wrote a treatise on music theory for the Kangxi Emperor in the 1680s, which includes a Guidonian hand, with the syllables written in Chinese characters and the flats and naturals intact. Pereira added an extra pitch on the outside of the thumb, so the spiral loops instead of stopping. 2 English words came off the hand. Gamut from gamma ut is the name of the note at the tip of the thumb, the bottom of the whole scheme. And by the 1620s, it meant the entire range of anything. And the top note on the back of the middle finger was called ila, the letter E plus the syllable la. A Jacobean playwright has a character say that something is above ila, meaning that somebody has gone too far. Guido spent his working life on a single proposition, that music could be written down precisely enough that a student would not need a master. In the prologue, once someone has learned part of the antiphoner from a teacher, he will recognize the rest by himself, without a teacher. And if anyone thinks this is a lie, let him come and try it and see. His whole argument for the staff is that the drift between one church's chant and another's is a failure of writing, and that better writing will fix it. The staff works because a mark's position fixes a pitch absolutely. Instead of pointing at a melody, the reader has to know already. And that is why a musician in one century can read what a musician in another wrote without either of them having met. Guido tried to make the master unnecessary. The hand is what the masters did anyway for another 4 centuries, in the part of the lesson the staff could not hold. That is why the drawings are rare and late and mostly somewhere else in the book. The name on it has been a citation error for 900 years.